The winter of 1871 hit Montana territory like a fist wrapped in barbed wire. Cold didn't creep in gradual that year. It slammed down in early November and squeezed until grown men couldn't feel their fingers and cattle froze standing upright in the fields. The kind of winter that killed the weak and made the strong wonder if they'd miscalculated their odds. Elsie Rowan was 10 years old the day her stepmother decided she wasn't worth keeping alive. She didn't understand it at first. Didn't grasp what was happening when Vivian Crow pulled the supply wagon to a stop in the middle of absolutely nowhere, miles from the nearest settlement, surrounded by nothing but snow-covered hills and skeletal trees that looked like they'd been dead for centuries. "Get down," Vivian said. Not loud, not angry, just flat. Elsie sat on the back of the wagon bed, her thin legs dangling over the edge, clutching the cloth rabbit her real mother had sewn before the fever took her 3 years back. The rabbit was falling apart now, one button eye missing, stuffing leaking from a torn seam along its back. "What?" Elsie's voice came out small. It always came out small around Vivian. "I said get down." Vivian twisted in the driver's seat, her face hard as the frozen ground. "We're stopping here." Elsie looked around. There was nothing here. No town, no ranch, no people. Just the rutted trail cutting through endless white and the wind howling like something dying slow. "But now, Elsie." Her father had been dead 6 days. They'd buried him in a shallow grave 2 days' ride back, wrapped in a blanket because the ground was too frozen to dig proper. Samuel Rowan, who'd spent his last 3 years married to Vivian after Elsie's mother died, who'd promised Elsie they were going west to start fresh, who'd coughed blood into his hands for the final week of his life, while Vivian watched with those flat, empty eyes. Elsie climbed down from the wagon, her boots crunching in the snow. She was small for 10, underfed and pale, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big that had belonged to some other child before her. The cold bit through it like it wasn't even there. Vivian didn't get down, didn't move, just sat there holding the reins, staring straight ahead at the empty trail. "You can't keep up," Vivian said finally. "You're too slow, too weak. You eat too much, and you don't do enough work to earn it." Elsie's fingers tightened on the rabbit. "I can work harder. I promise. It's already decided." Vivian's voice was calm. That was the worst part. She wasn't yelling, wasn't emotional. She'd thought this through, planned it. "Your father's gone. I don't owe you anything, never did. Please," the word came out broken. "Please don't leave me here." Vivian looked at her then, really looked at her, and there was nothing in her face. No guilt, no hesitation, nothing. "You got a canteen under the seat," Vivian said, "and there's some hardtack in that cloth by your feet. That's more than fair." She wasn't joking. Elsie stood there shaking, from cold, from fear, from the sudden understanding that this was real. This was actually happening. "Someone will come along eventually," Vivian said, gathering the reins. "Maybe." Then she snapped the leather and the wagon lurched forward. Elsie didn't scream, didn't chase after it. She just stood there watching the only thing connecting her to the world that made sense roll away through the snow, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared around a bend in the hills. The silence that followed was complete. No birds, no rustling, just wind and the creak of frozen branches and Elsie's own breathing, fast and shallow, starting to hitch in her chest. She looked down at the supplies Vivian had mentioned. The canteen was there, half frozen, maybe a third full. The hardtack was 4 pieces of bread so stale it could break teeth. That was it. That was what Vivian thought a child's life was worth. Elsie picked up the canteen with numb fingers, shoved the hardtack into her coat pocket, stood there holding her rabbit and trying to figure out what to do next. The sun was already dropping, maybe 2 hours of light left. Maybe less. She knew what happened to people caught alone in the Montana winter. She'd heard the stories around campfires, whispered by travelers who'd seen the bodies come spring, frozen solid, half-eaten by wolves, mouths open in screams nobody heard. She was going to die out here. The thought settled into her chest like a stone. Then, quiet as breathing, another thought followed it. Not if I keep moving. Elsie looked at the trail. Vivian had gone west, toward wherever she was heading. East would take Elsie back toward nothing. Just more emptiness, more frontier, more cold. North and south were wilderness. But the trail went both ways. Someone had made this trail. People used it. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But someone would come along eventually, and if Elsie could stay alive long enough, stay on the trail, stay visible, She started walking east. Not because she had a plan, not because she thought she'd make it, but because standing still meant freezing to death before midnight, and at least walking gave her body something to do besides shut down. Her boots were too big. They'd been her father's when he was a boy, stuffed with rags to make them fit. They rubbed blisters on her heels and let snow in around the laces. Every step was clumsy, exhausting. She walked anyway. The wind picked up as the sun dropped lower. It cut through her coat, through her dress, straight to her skin. Her face went numb first, then her fingers, even tucked under her armpits. The canteen swung from her belt, ice sloshing inside it. She didn't know how long she walked. Time stopped meaning anything. There was just the next step, then the next, then the next. The sky bled orange, then purple, then deep blue. Stars came out, cold and distant. Elsie kept walking. Her legs were shaking now. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She'd taken one piece of hardtack from her pocket an hour back and forced herself to chew it, but her mouth was so dry she could barely swallow. The water in the canteen was frozen solid. Still, she walked. Somewhere in the hills, a wolf howled. Another answered it from a different direction. Elsie's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She'd heard wolves before, back when she lived in the settlement with her real mother. They didn't usually come close to people. Usually. But a small girl alone in the dark, stumbling and weak, that was different. She tried to